In this video, we are going to explore functional groups that don't contain oxygen. And so when we think about organic molecules, they're generally composed of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. And so we're going to discuss amines. The general formula for an amine is RNH2. Or at least this is a primary amine. Because you can also have some random alkyl group R, 2 nitrogen, 1 hydrogen, and another R group. This is a secondary. And you can also have R nitrogen with 2 other R groups. And so we put a little dash just to say they're different. They could actually be the same. You could have 3 ethyls. You could have 2 ethyls and a methyl. You could have a methyl, methyl, propyl. They could be any mix you want. The idea is just, is there 1 carbon attached to the nitrogen? If so, there's 2 hydrogens. Are there 2 carbons attached to nitrogen? If so, there's 1 hydrogen. And are there 3 carbons attached to the nitrogen? If so, there are no hydrogens and you are tertiary. There's a rare situation where you can actually have 4 R groups attached to a nitrogen. This is a quaternary. This has an inherent plus charge on the nitrogen, and it rarely comes up except in very special ionic cases and a few important parts of biology, such as choline. We will not be discussing that in this section. We're going to focus on first the primary amines, and then discuss how to name secondary and tertiary. So, if I have this primary amine, which looks like, I'm going to draw it out for comparison here. Carbon, 3 hydrogens, carbon, 2 hydrogens, carbon and nitrogen, nitrogen to 2 hydrogens. So I have 2 carbon group with a nitrogen with amines, or with hydrogens. So since that is a nitrogen to a carbon and a nitrogen to hydrogens, and there's nothing else, there's no oxygens, there's nothing else going on, this is an amine. I have my R group is a 2 carbon chain, and I have my nitrogen with hydrogens. Well, we have 2 carbon, and that is our longest chain. Remember the functional groups. We want to find our longest chain that the nitrogen is attached to. We have carbon 1, because it's attached to the functional group, and carbon 2. So you'll start numbering in such a way as to give your amine the lowest first number possible. Since it's on the end of the chain, that'll be a 1. So this is an F for the carbon chain length. It is single bonded between carbons. It is an ethan. And when you have amines, the suffix for an amine is amine. Yes, they didn't give it anything special. Unlike all the oxygen containing, the nitrogen containings are very straightforward. Ethan, amine. So this is ethanamine. Now you could do ethan 1-amine, but no matter which carbon you put it on, that would be carbon 1. If you had a situation like this, well, you have to start numbering from one of the ends of the chain, so that amine either way would be on carbon 2, in which case this is prop for 3 carbon, propan for single bonds, and 2-amine. Propan 2-amine. And so, if I want to tell you there's an amine, we literally use the name amine as the suffix. And so there's no shorter version like alcohols had all, aldehydes had al, ketones had one, but nitrogen containings, they just use the name. So an amine is amine. So primary amines are just nitrogen to 1 carbon. You say what the carbon chain is, you tell where the nitrogen is attached, you say it's an amine. Let's talk about secondary. A secondary amine would look something like this. I have a 2-carbon group. I have a 1-carbon group. And I have my nitrogen with my hydrogens. So this is secondary, 2 carbons attached to my nitrogen. There's a modern way, an IUPAC way, and an old way to name this. We'll discuss both, but let's do the IUPAC. IUPAC is what we expect for modern naming. So IUPAC still says find longest chain. Well, that's going to be my 2-carbon chain. I need to number it such that the nitrogen gets the lowest. So this is an ethyl, or it's an eth chain. Our longest chain is eth. It's single bonded between carbons. It is ethan, and it is an amine, ethanamine. So in terms of our longest chain, that's no different than before. We saw ethanamine was an ethyl to an amine. Now that I have that methyl, I have to describe that methyl. Normally, if we had a chain, like say we had an alkane that looked like this, we would have called one of those a subgroup. It would have been 1, 2, 3. This would have been a 2-methyl propane, or propane. Well, subgroups, when they're on an alkane chain, is something we've gone through before. When it's attached to a nitrogen, well, it's not on a number. That methyl carbon is not on a numbered carbon from the main chain. It's attached to the nitrogen. It's still considered a methyl subgroup. So what we do is we still put a methyl out front as a subgroup, but its position is N. It is attached to the nitrogen. In the same way the methyl over on our right side example was attached at the 2 position, if your subgroup is attached to the nitrogen, you simply say position nitrogen. So it is an N-methyl ethanamine. We can take that one step further. Let's have 2 methyls coming off of it. Well, same as before. Find my longest chain. I find it's right there. I have subgroups. I have 2 methyls. Well, when you have 2 methyls, you're going to end up a dimethyl, and they're both on nitrogen. So this is an N dimethyl ethanamine. Again, the longest chain is 2, so it's ethan, because of single bond between carbons, so ethan for the single bond. And it's an amine, so ethanamine. So fix that spelling. And I have 2 methyls. And just like any other time where I have 2 methyls, I have to tell you where both of them are. If they were both on the same carbon, I would say 2,2 dimethyl, or 2,3 if they were on others. They're both on the nitrogen. So I say, well, where's the first one? Oh, it's on the nitrogen. Where's the second? Oh, it's on the nitrogen. I have 2 methyls. I have told you where they are. And so that's for a tertiary, a 3rd degree amine. And so you simply find the longest carbon chain for the amine. That is your base name. That is your base component that the amine suffix will be attached to. Any other R groups just that are attached to the nitrogen are treated like subgroups. Their naming goes out front, and you tell that they were on the nitrogen. So let's give that a try. Let's do a little bit of practice. Let's have... Alright, go ahead and pause here. Give all 3 of these a try, and then come on back and we'll work through them. Alright, if you're back, let's give this a shot. So over here on the right, I have an amine, and it is attached to a 6-membered ring. So if we want to think about 6-membered rings, they are cyclo, for being a ring, hex, for being 6. They're all single bonded, so hexan, and then amine. Cyclohexanamine. So our first one is just cyclohexanamine. Our second one, well, I have an ethyl and an ethyl. Well, this raises a problem. One of these is going to be a subgroup, and one of these is going to be the main chain. Well, it doesn't actually matter which one you pick. Either way, you have an ethyl subgroup and an ethanamine base. So either is fine. This just becomes ethyl, specifically N-ethyl, ethanamine. And so one of these ethyls, whichever you want, is the subgroup. It's attached to nitrogen. The other 2 carbons are the longest chain that our amine is attached to. And then our third one, well, longest chain, I've got 1, I've got 2, and I have 3. So this is going to be a prop, single bonded between carbons, propanamine. I have a methyl and an ethyl. They're both on the nitrogen, so I have an N-ethyl, N-methyl propanamine. And so that is the IUPAC naming. That is how you would identify these through IUPAC. You find the longest chain, you put amine at the end as a suffix, and then the other nitrogen attached parts are subgroups. Let's talk about old names. Some amines are still mentioned in their old names. And so let's take a second and discuss those. If I go back and I have this. Well, in the old naming, the amine was just the nitrogen bit. We said, well, that was my group. The nitrogen was my amine. If there was anything else on it, they were considered subgroups. And so as far as the old naming was concerned, I had a subgroup here, I had a subgroup here, which means I had 2 ethyls. In fact, this was a diethyl amine. In the old naming, it's a lot kind of like ethers. We just name the things coming off as subgroups. All of them were. Well, IUPAC picks the longest one to be the main chain and only has some of them be subgroups. Old naming, all of them were subgroups. So if you had nitrogen with an ethyl and a methyl, you were ethyl methyl amine. If you had a nitrogen that had just, let's say, 3 methyls on it, you were a tri-methyl amine. We still see this. Triethylamine is the common name and is used actually more often for if you have a nitrogen with 3 ethyls on it. Despite that it should be N-diethyl ethanamine. Historical precedent, common usage in industry, the very common use in research labs. It has maintained its name. And so sometimes you will still see these amine compounds with very old names. And so I want you to be able to recognize where they're coming from if you run into them.